Hegelian dialectics is a method of understanding reality, thought, and all of human history through development. And it's the idea is that things are not best understood as fixed and isolated. They're understood through the movement and tension and contradiction between things and transformation. And the central idea, I think, is actually really simple, and it's that any concept or form of life first appears stable and complete, but when it's examined closely, you see the limits and internal tensions within that, and the tension pushes thought beyond the original concept into a fuller one. And the later concept does not simply erase the earlier one. It overcomes it, but it also preserves what was true in it. And this movement is the basic structure of dialectics, of Hegelian dialectics. And this is why Hegel is not just a philosopher of very, static, rigid definitions. He doesn't believe that truth is something you find by taking a concept in isolation and looking at that and really getting into that and treating it as complete. It's about truth that is emerging through development. And to understand something more fully, someone has to see what it becomes, what problems arise within it, and how it moves beyond itself. And a common simplification to explain Hegel is to explain Hegel through the formula thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. But that's misleading. That is a part of Hegelian dialectics, but it's misleading because it's suggesting an artificial pattern in which one idea is followed by its opposite and then by a compromise. But Hegel's actual method is a lot more precise than that. He tries to show that a concept contains an inner instability, that the next stage comes from that instability, not necessarily from an external pairing. The movement is internal rather than this sort of mechanical movement. And that's why the idea of contradiction is therefore central. Because for Hegel, contradiction is not only a sign of error, it's the driving force of all development, right? A concept can claim to be very self-sufficient, but the closer thought reveals what it depends on, what it excludes, or that it cannot remain what it claims to be. It can't be what it was or what it says it is. When that happens, contradiction forces that movement. It becomes very productive. And that's in the beginning in Hegel's logic. It's the beginning of Hegel's logic. He starts with pure being, meaning being in the most abstract and indeterminate sense. But pure being with no qualities or determination is so empty that it becomes indistinguishable from nothing. The truth of both being and nothing is not found in either one, taken separately, but in their movement into each other. And that movement is becoming. In this example, it's showing, the basic form of dialectical thinking, which is a concept, when thought with enough rigor, doesn't remain what it first seemed to be. It's passing into a richer form. And negation is another part of this. It's another basic concept, a part of it. And negation means simple denial, right? In Hegel, negation is more than that, though. It's the process by which a form is overcome, limited, and changed or transformed. But negation does not necessarily mean complete destruction, right? In dialectical development, what is negated is also preserved. And this is expressed in the Hegelian term, excuse my pronunciation here, Aufhebung, Aufhebung, but it's translated to sublation, right? The term has multiple meanings at once: to cancel, to preserve, to lift up, and all three of these are important. But a lower stage is canceled because it is no longer sufficient. It's preserved because it contained a partial truth. It's lifted up because that truth contains within it a higher, more complete form. And this is one of the main reasons Hegel's method is difficult but also powerful. It's not treating earlier stages as false, it's treating them as incomplete. And Hegel applies this method not only to logic, but to consciousness, society, politics, history. And he examines how consciousness develops through a series of stages. Consciousness does not begin with full self-knowledge. It advances through experience, the error, the tension, correction. And each stage claims to offer the final complete truth, but each reveals its own limits that forces movement to the next stage, to another stage. And one of the most famous examples of this is the master-slave dialectic, in which Hegel is arguing that self-consciousness requires recognition, that a self cannot become fully itself in complete isolation. It must be recognized by another self-conscious being. And this is creating struggle in the initial outcome. One becomes master and the other bondsman. At first, the master seems superior, but the relation contains a contradiction. The master depends on the bondsman for labor and for recognition, while the bondsman, through labor and discipline, develops a deeper relation to the world and to himself. So what first appeared to be the stable hierarchy turns out to be very unstable. The truth of the relation emerges through the tension within it, through the internal tension. And that's the example is showing the several features of dialectical thinking. First, apparent superiority may conceal dependence. Second, what appears subordinate may become the site of development. And third, contradiction is not accidental. It reveals the deeper structure of the situation. And Hegel uses dialectics to explain freedom itself. He rejects the idea that freedom is simply the ability to do whatever someone wants. A lot of people have that idea. A lot of people reject that idea, actually. But that idea for him is an abstract and insufficient notion of freedom. Real freedom must become objective. It must exist in institutions, laws, and forms of ethical life. Right? A person becomes not free in isolation, but through participation in a rational social order. And that leads to another important Hegelian idea, mediation. Hegel opposes the idea of immediacy as the final truth. Right? Immediate thinking treats something as simple, self-contained, and fully given. Hegel's arguing that real understanding requires mediation. A thing becomes what it is through relation, process, and development. The self becomes itself through recognition. Freedom becomes real through institutions. Right? Concepts become intelligible through their relation to what they negate and overcome. And this is why Hegel places so much importance on family, civil society, and the state, because they're not accidental social arrangements added on top of individuals who are already complete. They're stages in the realization of freedom. Right? The family represents an immediate ethical unity. Civil society introduces the separation, competition, and the individuality. And the state, in Hegel's ideal, is the higher ethical form in which freedom becomes organized and objective. But whether one agrees with this account or not, the dialectical structure of this is very clear. That the simpler forms reveal the limits of it, but those limits generate more complex forms. And history overall for Hegel follows the same pattern, right? History is not a meaningless series of events. It's the development of human freedom through time, right? Different historical worlds embody different understandings of freedom and order. Each historical stage has its own developments, has its own achievements and its own contradictions. And these contradictions aren't destroying history, they're moving history forward. And so Hegel therefore sees history as rational in structure, though not necessarily peaceful or morally clean. Conflict, suffering and upheaval are part of the development. That doesn't mean that, every event that happens with those things is justified. But what it does mean is that historical change is intelligible, right? Human societies do not simply jump around and move at random. They're developing through tension within their own forms of life. And this is closely tied to Hegel's concept of spirit or Geist. Spirit it's not like a ghostly substance for Hegel. It refers to human-minded life as it develops collectively and historically. It includes consciousness, culture, law, institutions, art, religion, and philosophy. spirit is humanity becoming aware of itself through history, and dialectics is the movement through which this awareness develops. And the result is that truth, for Hegel, is not best understood as a static proposition detached from the whole process. Truth is the whole. And that's kind of actually a difficult claim. That might seem obvious, but it means that the isolated stages, concepts, and forms of life contain partial truth, and their full meaning only appears only in relation to the whole process of development. And this kind of helps explain why Hegel often seems so resistant to simple oppositions. He doesn't want to, he doesn't want to choose one side and reject the other completely. He wants to show how each side contains a partial truth, how each side is limited, and how both are taken up into a higher unity, right? The aim of dialectics is not endless contradiction for its own sake. Its aim is for fuller comprehension. And that's why Hegel's thought, and often for the most part, ends in reconciliation, right? Reconciliation doesn't mean that we pretend that the contradiction ever existed. What it actually means is understanding how contradiction was necessary to develop, and how a higher form can contain what earlier forms couldn't fix, the earlier forms couldn't resolve. So dialectics isn't stopping with just the conflict. It moves toward understanding. And the basic structure of Hegelian dialectics is it starts with a concept or a form that's appearing stable, and then a closer examination reveals to us the internal contradiction or the limits of the concept. And then that contradiction is driving development into a fuller form, which overcomes the earlier one, but preserves what was true in it. And the pattern, if you look at it, the pattern does appear in logic, consciousness, ethics, politics, history. And the method matters because it changes how someone thinks. Instead of treating ideas and institutions or identities as fixed, it's asking, how are they developed? How did they get here? Why are they like this? What tensions they contain and what they depend on? It's looking for movement within apparent stability. It treats contradiction as a clue to a deeper truth rather than mere failure. And that's why Hegel was so important for the later thinkers like Marx. And I think Marx kind of rejected Hegel's idealism, but he keeps the dialectical emphasis on contradiction and development and all the transformation, right? And in that sense, understanding Hegelian dialectics is necessary for complete understanding of later modern philosophy and political theory, particularly relating to Marx.